And today the talk is a continuation from where I left off, talking about special ways of being helpful to our extended family. And actually this time last week I already started out on this subject, and it is part of a sequence of talks which I've been giving about really ways in which we can become a pillar of society. The idea in this sequence of what are known as 38 blessings, which come from something called the Mangala Sutta in the Buddhist scriptures, is that if we can stand on our own 2 feet financially, then from there we can move on to work on things like harmony in our family life, looking after our children, looking after our parents, looking after our spouse. And once that is all properly in place, taken care of, maybe we can look further to reach out to other people beyond our family in the wider society to see what we can do to help them. But what I've been saying over the last few weeks is that it's not easy to be someone who does welfare work or reaches out to others beyond our family to help them, because sometimes we can overstretch ourselves, sometimes we can be misunderstood by those who we are trying to help, and sometimes we can even be taken advantage of by those who we are trying to help. So we need to have a little bit more caution in the way that we reach out to others. Last time was mostly the good side of helping other people, and what I talked about was really the expectations of those who we are trying to help and trying to help them in an appropriate way. And the principle I gave was that mostly for our families, we would help them, our close family, in an unconditional sort of way. So if they need something, we will help them in every case. But for those who are in our extended family, what I proposed was that we can help them from time to time, when we can, or when it's a special occasion, in order to help them. But there are some cases where, although in Buddhist culture really we are generally quite soft-hearted, a little bit of a soft touch perhaps when helping other people, a little bit of the bleeding heart approach to a helping society, sometimes we tend to be kind to other people to a fault. And there's a sense in which we have to strike a balance with welfare work. And done in the wrong way, then welfare work can actually be a disadvantage to those even on the receiving end of the welfare. Don't look very convinced? Sometimes by trying to help people, we can make their problems worse if we are not careful. Not convinced? Well, there's a whole book about it. There's a book recently written, and it's not by someone who wants you not to be generous to other people, but it's someone who would prefer that the generosity you give to other people is given in the right sort of way. And the book is entitled Toxic Charity, because there are some statistics that especially welfare work in places like Africa from so-called wealthy countries, they've given more than $1 trillion in benevolent aid to Africa in the last 50 years. And in fact, if you look at the standard of living and quality of life of those living in Africa now and 50 years ago, you find in many places they are worse off than they were 50 years ago for all that spending. Pretty hard to believe, right? But rather than discouraging charity, what Mr. Robert Lupton, who wrote that book, said is that we ought to have certain principles which we try to follow when we are giving aid to others. Firstly, never to do for poor people what they have the capacity to do for themselves. Secondly, one-way giving should only be the standard practice in emergency situations. The third thing is that if people are poor, then the thing to do is not just to give them things, but to try to empower them to help themselves. Because that is somehow less patronizing, and it gives the people the pride of being able to help themselves for a change. Many of the foreign entities that give welfare work only do so because there's something in it for them business-wise. So they give lots of tractors to these poor farmers, but they have to get all the spares from their company, for example. So it's like good business for them to give the tractors to them in the first place, that sort of thing. So they should not be thinking about their self-interest when they are donating something in that way, but they need to listen instead to the needs of those who are being helped. And that means actually listening to those people who you are trying to help before you help them. I read some interesting things about what is known as appropriate economics for countries which are in transition. A lot of this comes from E.F. Schumacher and his idea of small is beautiful, which goes back a few years, but which is still being put into practice in the present day. And sometimes what people in a country in transition need is not some fancy new four-wheel drive to sort of burn up their muddy roads or whatever and create erosion. Actually, sometimes what people need is something much simpler. And to give an example, what the people already had is bicycles in a transitional country. They didn't actually want to learn to drive and have like big tractor-like vehicles to burn up their roads. All they wanted something simple like bicycles and places to mend them. So the bicycles worked. So they could use what they already had more efficiently. And then, you know what they wanted on the bicycle? This is like actually listening to them. Well, what they had, which they could sell in the market, is eggs. And the major problem which they had in life was that by the time they got the eggs to the market, they had all broken on the way. So what did they design? Firstly, bicycles and places to mend the bicycles. Secondly, they designed a special sort of box which they can put the eggs in, so that when they reach the end of the journey to the market, they were not all broken by the journey in between. So that people could actually have something to sell, and then they got the money from the sales, and they can stop being poor people. So the whole company is built up, firstly, many bicycles in order to make little boxes to put eggs in, so they didn't break during the journey. And from this whole transformation has happened in that particular area which they were trying to help. So this is like an idea of appropriate technology for transitional countries. So actually during these 38 blessings, there's probably not another place where I'm going to be able to talk about welfare work. So may as well talk about it here. The real thing for understanding in especially more individualistic countries in the West is that in the West we tend to think in quite an individualistic sort of way. If anyone here has a chance to travel in somewhere like Asia, you will probably be very surprised by the amount of respect and hospitality which you receive from the people who you visit, which may be so great that it actually astounds you. You would never get such a good reception going around visiting countries in Europe, let's say. Because the whole idea of family for many Asian countries, especially the countries where Buddhism is dominant, is that it doesn't just restrict itself to your kids and your wife or husband. It extends to everyone possible who you can help out. Sometimes people have money and they don't even regard the money as their own, but they regard the money as belonging to their whole family. Because it's only through the help of their family that they got to a position where they can earn that money in the first place. So people actually feel quite embarrassed to have personal, individual riches. If someone gets successful in a family, then they feel it's their responsibility to give back. And even if you're a guest in an Asian home, not just Asia, also India or even in Latin America, if you're going to stay with the family, often the whole family will give up their bedroom and their bed and go and sleep on the floor so that the guest can sleep on the nice bed. That is like normal in Asia. This is like the sort of the whole outlook on life is very different from the individualistic West. But at the same time, this opens people up to a lot of suffering in the case that they are taken advantage of, because it's like a two-way street. You know, as a guest, it's very nice to have a comfortable place to stay, but you have to understand what goes on behind the scenes, that this whole system can be taken advantage of if you are not very careful indeed. To the point that I've heard some Thai people say, because they've been living in a place like England or USA for many years, they're now seen as the big rich member of the family who's going to come back home from time to time and just sort of give money to everyone. So you get a whole queue of people coming to them and asking for this and that, to the point that there's no way in the world they could possibly help all those members of their family. They never realized they had such a big family sometimes, because it's just like an endless queue of people asking for their help. The point that some people I know, they go back home, in secret. They don't dare to tell their family they are coming, because otherwise they're going to be met with a huge queue of people who are just going to be asking them for money for everything. From starting a business to buying a new minibus to helping out with this or that operation for relatives they've never met before, this sort of thing. So there's a balance somewhere. At the same time, there's this open-handedness, but at the same time, there's this sort of thing where you have limits on what you can help with as well. So where to draw the line? What happens if you get relatives turning up the door and asking for money from you? Well, apparently it's a subject which people enjoy looking at. Sometimes because it's a member of our family and they are in need, apparently, and they come looking for us, it's very tempting to try to help them as much as you can. However, we might be left feeling financially burdened by family members, and it may lead to painful conflicts arising, and ultimately it might not lead either to their ultimate well-being or to our ability to recover our financial standing either. So it's worth considering what alternatives are available rather than just pulling out our wallet. So 5 pieces of advice which are taken from a blog for a person who gets looked up by relatives on a regular basis is, firstly, you need to look at whether the person who's asking for the money has got a certain level of financial common sense themselves, which might be the reason that they're coming to ask you for money in the first place. If they haven't got that sense of common sense financially, then it may be something you can teach them. It's like, not in a Buddhist sense, of course, but instead of giving them the fish, you can teach them how to fish. Of course, in Buddhism, fishing is never good, okay. But the idea is to teach them how to be able to take responsibility, to empower them to help themselves in this respect, rather than to rely on other people. Second thing is, sometimes if you can't help them directly, you can introduce them to someone who can. Whether it's an employer or a person who can be a person who can give them a long-term fix rather than just something in the short term, which may be much more valuable than just a short-term loan or gift. Sometimes if you don't know anyone, you can offer them the opportunity to work for some money, or to you can maybe even offer to buy something of them, so that there's some sort of two-way involved, so that it's not somehow looking down on them to give them that money. If a person earns the money, they feel much differently about it than if it's just received as a gift. Yeah? It's like more dignified for that person to receive it in that way. Fourth thing might be to invest in them, which, if you're thinking about their potential or some sort of setting up a business of their own, then it might make sense to invest in what they're doing, rather than just giving a gift to them. And lastly, there's always the possibility to say no, which sometimes may not have occurred to you. If you can't say no, but you might not give it to them because you don't feel sorry for them, because they're obviously like messed up or something, but you might like help out their children, because the children are the ones who also ultimately suffer by buying something for their school equipment once a year or something like that. So with welfare work, and whether you're talking on a family level or on a national level, if you're the sort of humanitarian aid commissioner for a certain country, you need to make the same sort of decisions. You need to look and select who are likely to benefit from the things that you can help them with. And in this sense, those who are likely to be a good prospect for any help which you do decide to give would be those, firstly, who are already making an effort to visibly make an effort to help themselves. So what you're doing is only helping things which they are already doing to help themselves. A person is just going through a rough time at the moment, well, that's okay. But then there are certain people who are making no effort to help themselves, and they still want you to help them. And really that is likely not to make any difference at all. Especially people who they are so fussy about any job that they want to do that they won't do anything at all to help themselves. They feel that certain sort of jobs are beneath them, even though they haven't got any money left, then maybe they need to change their way of thinking first. They won't do babysitting, they won't do home decorating or sell off excess stuff in their house, and yet they help you, they expect you to give them money. And that is generally a bad sign. And generally those who are grateful or considerate or courteous are generally better prospects than those who are likely to behave like they have a right to your help, or they feel come routinely asking for money. Those who probably you should avoid are those who are suffering from some sort of addiction, because that always adds a complication where you may end up the money being channeled into the addiction rather than helping them to get on their own feet. It's like you're enabling their addiction by helping them in many cases. Secondly, those who you've helped several times already and they still keep coming back means that they haven't really sorted out the long-term problems yet. We had a story last a couple of sessions ago about the drunk nephew who kept coming back for help from his uncle. The first time the uncle helped him to the full. Second time he helped him with only half. Third time he gave him some new clothes, which the drunk still went off and sold in order to get money for alcohol. When he came back a fourth time, he kicked him out of the house. Because it's like he's had his 3 chances already. Yeah. So sometimes 3 strikes is if you're feeling kind and benevolent, then give people 3 strikes. At least you got 3 chances to see what they do with what you give them to help. So those who are unwilling to budget, or those with a blaming personality where what you help them with may come back to bite you, generally it's better not to go down that road in the first place. I have a little story, a true story, or at least true from the internet anyway. And for those who feel afraid to say no, you might use this as a sort of little example which you might help you to feel better about it. So there was a guy, his name was Marco, and he was between jobs somewhere in the United States, and all he needed really was $500 to tide him over. So he went to all the members of his family. He had 3 brothers, and they all turned their backs on him out of selfishness mostly, and they judged him because they were working, but he was not. And even though they knew that he had potential, and he was applying for jobs, and he even had 1 job lined up possibly in a month's time, they still didn't help him. So they all refused to help him. His own family refused him. So pretty bad, right? But it turned out to be a blessing in disguise, because he kept on going to college anyway with like what he'd already spent on his tuition fees, and eventually he could get a bachelor's degree out of that and qualified as a scientist. And 1 month after his graduation, he started his own research company. And in his first year, actually, he managed to earn back $500,000. And it turned out that since he had his newfound wealth, actually all his family members started treating him very differently from before. And they were now interested in him again. And they even came to him asking for handouts. And actually he could have avoided his family by hiding out in his lab. But his grandparents had taught him that 2 wrongs don't make a right. So one of Marco's brothers, one which he'd been asking for help from before, actually his brother had recently got $3,000 in child support arrears because he got laid off recently from a swanky trucking job, which he used to brag about. And that brother had a warrant on him, and he actually got arrested and he was sitting in prison with no one offering to bail him out. So this guy Marco, like the guy who'd been asking for help before, now he's much better place in life. He actually went to the child support offices, paid his brother's bill and court fees, and had him released. And his brother was really surprised that it was Marco who was the one to come and get him out, because he lived far away in another state. And when his brother asked him about this, all he could say to his brother was, "Mind how you treat me, because you may need me again someday." So sometimes no can be a blessing in disguise, but the best way of all is that if you still feel good about your family, then try to help them out where possible, especially where it's not just proving your point, but it's actually helping them to be in a better place. So the moral of the story is, try never to turn your back on your family. But if there is a problem with your family or a problem that they are experiencing, try to investigate to the root cause before you decide how to help. And a relevant proverb is, love many, trust few, but always paddle your own canoe. Yes. Spiritual ways to look after your extended family. It's not all about money, but there are many spiritual ways in which you can reach out to others. Sometimes the gifts and positive things that we can give to our family, especially if we are someone who understands things like meditation or spiritual practice already, is to reach out to others with spiritual practice. And sometimes we may have relatives who maybe they're even quite wealthy, but their life still feels meaningless or hollow. We can help them by maybe facilitating them to have more spiritual activities in their lives. So it might mean taking them down to the meditation center or encouraging them to keep the precepts or to practice more generosity. Last but not least today, I'll finish with a short story from the life of the Buddha about when he did something to help his family out. And as we mentioned earlier, the Buddha was a part of a very big family. In fact, two very big families. One family was called the Shakyas and Shakyamuni. And on his mother's side was a different family completely, who was from the Korean kingdom. In fact, the Buddha did a lot to help out his family, and mostly it was to stop them having wars with one another. Well, maybe you don't have wars going on in your family, but there were apparently 3 times in the Buddha's life when he managed to intervene in such a way. Once was when there was a prince called Viduttappa who was going to go back and get his own back on the Sakyans for treating him with conceit. I'll come back to that story a little bit later on in the blessings. But the Buddha tried to dissuade him from doing that. Another one was King Ajasatru, who tried to declare war on the Vajrayans, and again the Buddha advised against that. But the story I want to tell you today is a story about the River Rohini. And the story goes that on one side of the river lived the Sakyans, on the other side lived the Koreans. So one side of the river, his father's side of the family, the other side of the river, his mother's side of the family. And there was a particular time, maybe rather similar to our heat wave times today, when the river was at rather a low level. And because on both sides of the river, the farmers relied on the river water to irrigate their fields, there was not enough water to go around. So when there was a severe drought and the paddy fields were running dry, the farmers in both kingdoms wanted to divert the water into their own fields. And the farmers started to fight amongst one another. And once the farmers started fighting, then the armies got involved as well. And eventually, without a compromise, both sides were prepared to go to war about this. So the Buddha knew what was going on, and once he learned that he had relatives on both sides of the river, he decided to intervene to prevent unnecessary suffering. So actually he went alone to the middle of the river, and as they were preparing for battle, he intervened between the two sides. And seeing that he was there, then they put down their weapons before they got to use them. And the Buddha asked them a very poignant question: which one to you is more precious, the irrigation water or your own blood? And they said, I suppose our blood is more precious. So the Buddha said, for the sake of some water, which is of very little value, you should not destroy your lives, which are of much greater value. So why have you taken this unwholesome course of action? If I had not been here today, the blood would already be flowing, just as this river is flowing right now. You are living with hatred, but I am free of hatred. You are burdened by moral defilements, but I am free of moral defilements. You are striving to develop selfishness and enmity, but I am released from selfishness. So hearing his words, both sides became ashamed of their foolishness, and the bloodshed was averted. So maybe you can do one small part of that for your own families by intervening, even without spending any money at all, and creating a much better time for any opposing forces or squabbles in your family. For those of you who enjoyed meditation today, I would invite you to meditate further, and the best way to do that is to try to develop a daily practice of meditation, meditating at home at a time of day when for you it's convenient, at the same time each day, maybe just for 20 minutes to start out with, or less if your children. Take your age and multiply that by the number of minutes, and you get about the right length of time for yourself. For grown-ups, they need to meditate much longer to get the same results. It might be first thing in the morning to give yourself a good start of the day. It might be last thing at night, especially if you have trouble getting to sleep. Or it may even be in your lunch break if you have a stressful job. Sometimes you can remember how to meditate, which is fine. If you can't remember how to meditate, you can download this app called MindGem onto your mobile phone, and it will give you audio tracks, like hundreds of them, different ones, which you can listen to as you're meditating, and you can even set a timer on that in order to meditate for the length of time you set for yourself. Generally, if you meditate at home, then you can count on about 7 days before you start getting lazy, at which point it's quite good to be part of a group where you can sort of boost your inspiration levels by meditating along with others. Here in Woking, we have meditations every Tuesday and Thursday evening. The only difference between the two evenings is that generally it's a slightly longer meditation on the Thursday evening. So 45 minutes as opposed to 30 minutes. Also, there is a meditation remnant from the pandemic, where on Saturdays there's a Zoom channel where you can meditate and hear a Dhamma teaching from the monks, and it's held European-wide. British time it's 7 to 8 p.m. Next Thursday, because it's the full moon and the start of the Buddhist Lent, then there will be a special teaching here and meditation, which probably will involve the lighting of candles of some sort. Maybe not those candles, but it's something to do with the Buddhist Lent candles. And my colleague, the Venerable Pisit, will be leading that one between 7 and 8:30. It will be held in person here, but also online for anyone who cannot attend in person. Last weekend we had great fun down Somerset Way. Just a little flavor of some of the meditation there, because we had such nice weather. Most of our meditations were outside, and we could actually do that without the sound of traffic and planes passing by. It was very rejuvenating to be able to sit outside and meditate. We do try to hold meditation retreats on weekends once every 3 months, and the dates for the next one, which you can put in your diary if you're interested, are the 16th to 18th of September. It will probably be held right here, and generally our accommodation is the 2 sides on the mezzanine floors you can see here with dormitories. Also coming up in August, we have for youngsters, for warriors, ordination scheme for 2 weeks between the 30th of July and the 14th of August. Usually the first week involves training oneself with 8 precepts, Atta Sila, and then the ordination itself, taking 10 precepts as novices, will take place on the first Sunday of the month, and then you are able to be a novice for a whole 7 days. just in time to go back to school afterwards. Ages 10 to 19 normally. At a pinch, anyone who is able to take their own shower without help from the teaching monks may be considered, even if you are under 10 years old. For the girls, we also have, during the vacation time, the training on 8 precepts, and it will be between the 26th and 28th of August. And we also take grown-ups as well, but all ladies together, and we'll have a separate room for the kids. Yeah. Also, I will say in advance that because we have quite a lot of trainings going on in August, the usual classes won't be held during the month of August. So Tuesday and Thursdays will be postponed until the start of September because of the residential courses going on here during that time.